Brothers and sisters, as we turn our eyes back to the fiery skies of the Pacific, we remember a time when the courage of men and the might of machines clashed above the vast oceans. In the summer of 1944, over the islands of the Marianas, the Japanese Air Force believed their Zero fighters still ruled supreme. But America had brought forth a new guardian of the skies, the F6F Hellcat. This was not just a machine of war, but a symbol of relentless innovation, discipline, and the determination to crush tyranny from the air. Today, we reflect upon how terror struck the hearts of Japanese pilots when they met the Hellcat in battle, and what lessons of strength, endurance, and divine providence we can draw from this turning point. When the war in the Pacific began, the skies belonged to the Japanese Zero. It was fast, agile, and unmatched in dogfights, striking fear into the hearts of Allied pilots who climbed into their cockpits knowing they were often outmatched. From Pearl Harbor to the Coral Sea, from the Philippines to Wake Island, the legend of the Zero grew, and so too did the aura of invincibility surrounding the Japanese Air Force. But war is a crucible where innovation is forged in fire, and America refused to surrender the heavens. Out of the factories of Grumman came a machine destined to change the very balance of power, the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat was born not as an experiment, but as a direct response to the enemy's superiority. Its creation was not a mere adjustment, but a revolution in air warfare design. The engineers studied the Zero, its strengths and its flaws, and then crafted a fighter that could not only match it, but dominate it in every critical measure. It was larger, sturdier, more heavily armed, and built to absorb punishment while delivering lethal fire. It was not the graceful dancer in the sky like the Zero, but a heavyweight brawler that carried American determination in its steel frame and roaring engine. For Japanese pilots who once believed their aircraft untouchable, the arrival of the Hellcat was a nightmare made flesh. Where once they could dive, roll, and evade, now they found themselves pursued, trapped, and struck down with ruthless efficiency. In the skies over the Marianas, this truth was revealed in thunder and fire. The Zero could turn tighter, yes, but the Hellcat could climb higher, dive faster, and take hits that would tear a Zero apart. Its 650 caliber Browning machine guns spat streams of fire that shredded wings, pierced engines, and left no room for escape. The terror was not only in its firepower, but in its resilience. Japanese pilots had grown used to scoring hits on their enemies, watching smoke trails spiral downward as American fighters fell to the sea. But against the Hellcat, their bullets seemed to vanish into its armor. Time and again, pilots returned shaken, telling tales of Hellcats that absorbed punishment and still kept flying, still kept killing. To fight against such a foe was to feel the despair of struggling against inevitability. Yet it was not only the machine that struck fear into the Japanese, it was the spirit of the men who flew it. American pilots, trained with new discipline and armed with superior technology, fought with relentless aggression. They were no longer the hesitant defenders of the early war, but seasoned warriors who carried the memory of Pearl Harbor, Bataan, and Guadalcanal into every dogfight. The Hellcat became their sword and shield, a weapon of vengeance and liberation. The rise of the Hellcat did more than secure victories. It shattered the myth of Japanese air dominance. It signaled to the world that the tide had turned, that the Pacific skies no longer belonged to the rising sun, but to the stars and stripes painted on the wings of this deadly machine. At Marianas, in that decisive summer, the Japanese discovered that the terror they once inspired had been turned upon them, multiplied and made unstoppable. The Hellcat was more than metal and fire. It was the embodiment of America's will to fight, to innovate, and to endure. And in the eyes of Japanese pilots who saw their comrades fall in flames, it was a vision of unstoppable judgment descending from the clouds. The Japanese pilots who once soared through the Pacific skies with confidence quickly found themselves haunted by a new reality when they faced the F6F Hellcat. The aircraft they had mocked as clumsy in its early conception became a relentless predator that stalked them across the vast expanses of ocean. Fear crept into their cockpits even before the battles began, for rumors spread through their squadrons of Hellcats that seemed invincible of American pilots who no longer fought defensively but hunted aggressively, chasing down every Zero until the sky was cleared. For the Japanese aviators who had been trained to believe in their own supremacy, the battlefield became a place of dread. Every takeoff was a silent gamble with death. The moment a pilot strapped into his Zero and climbed into the blue, he knew the odds had shifted against him. Once he might have been the hunter, the one who dictated the terms of combat, but against the Hellcat he became prey. Reports circulated of squadrons wiped out in minutes, of formations shattered before they could even organize, and of pilots who never returned because the Hellcats would not allow escape. Those who survived carried home stories of merciless chases, where even a desperate dive could not shake the heavier American machine, and where tracer rounds cut across their path like a wall of fire. The fear was not unfounded. For many Japanese pilots, their experience in the air was one of futility. Their once-mastered techniques, tight turns, sudden rolls, lightning-quick dives, had lost their power. The Hellcat's superior horsepower meant it could climb above them and strike from on high. Its armor meant that even when they landed hits, the American machine shook off the damage and pressed forward. Its guns meant that one burst could end a life in seconds. The psychological toll was immense. They were no longer fighting for victory but for survival, and survival itself became a vanishing hope. Some Japanese commanders tried to instill courage, reminding their men of the spirit of the samurai, of honor in death, of duty to the emperor. But in the skies over the Marianas, the voice of tradition could not silence the roar of the Hellcat's engine. The reality of war pressed harder than rhetoric. And the young men who once believed they would bring glory to their nation instead looked into the horizon with dread, knowing that somewhere beyond the clouds, the Hellcat was waiting. This fear turned to desperation in their tactics. Many pilots, realizing their machines could not match the Americans, resorted to reckless maneuvers, diving into hopeless engagements in the faint chance of scoring a kill. Others began to embrace the idea of self-destruction, preparing for the desperate age of kamikaze attacks that would soon come. For they had seen with their own eyes that conventional combat against the Hellcat meant certain death. The terror was not simply in defeat, but in helplessness. The loss of control over the sky, the loss of confidence in the machine beneath them, the loss of the belief that they could return home alive. Thus, every encounter with the Hellcat carried with it the weight of fear. Pilots climbed into their cockpits with trembling hands, reciting prayers not for victory but for mercy. The Hellcat had transformed the once proud Japanese Air Force into a force fighting shadows, its courage drained, its will shattered. And in that fear lay the silent acknowledgement that the war in the skies was no longer theirs to win. The F6F Hellcat was not simply another fighter, it was a weapon crafted with purpose, forged through bitter lessons, and refined until it became the very embodiment of dominance in the sky. Where the Japanese Zero had been built for agility and speed at the cost of protection, the Hellcat was designed as a fortress with wings. It carried with it a philosophy that valued endurance, firepower, and survivability over elegance, and it was this philosophy that ensured its triumph. At the heart of the Hellcat was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, a powerhouse that gave the aircraft unmatched climbing ability and raw speed. This engine did not merely push the Hellcat through the air, it hurled it into battle with the strength of a storm. Japanese pilots often found themselves outpaced in vertical climbs, unable to follow the American fighters as they rose above the fight, only to dive back down in deadly assaults. This advantage turned every engagement into a one-sided struggle, where the Hellcat dictated the tempo of combat. Then there was its resilience. The Hellcat was wrapped in armor, with self-sealing fuel tanks and reinforced frames designed to absorb punishment and keep flying. Stories abound of Hellcats returning to their carriers riddled with holes, their fuselages torn and scarred, yet their engines still running, their pilots still alive. This durability was a revelation in the Pacific, for while the Zero crumpled under gunfire, the Hellcat endured. Pilots trusted their machines, knowing that even under the heaviest fire, they had a chance to fight their way home. Trust in one's aircraft was a priceless weapon, and the Hellcat delivered it in abundance. But what truly made the Hellcat a terror in the skies was its firepower. 650 caliber Browning machine guns lined its wings, each capable of spitting destruction in streams of burning lead. A single burst was enough to tear through the fragile skin of a Zero, to shatter wings, explode fuel tanks, or send engines spiraling into flames. Unlike earlier fighters, which required precise marksmanship and lengthy bursts, the Hellcat's guns allowed for devastating efficiency. In the chaos of dogfights, this meant the difference between victory and death. The design extended beyond weaponry and armor. The Hellcat was built to be flown by ordinary men, not only the most skilled aces. It had forgiving handling, stable controls, and the ability to take off and land on carriers with reliability. This meant that America could train thousands of pilots and send them into combat with confidence, knowing the Hellcat would carry them safely and effectively. In this way, the aircraft multiplied America's strength, not just by being superior, but by making every pilot who flew it more capable. The Japanese recognized this with despair. They saw a machine that could dive faster, shoot harder, and withstand more punishment than anything they possessed. They faced not just an enemy aircraft, but a flying symbol of American industrial might, a reminder that their once-feared Zero had been eclipsed. The Hellcat's design was more than mechanics. It was strategy forged in metal, a response to enemy strength turned into overwhelming superiority. Every time the Hellcat thundered into the sky, it carried with it the weight of design brilliance, the roar of its mighty engine and the sting of its guns. It was not built to impress. It was built to win, and win it did, leaving Japanese pilots broken in both body and spirit. The story of the Hellcat is not only one of metal and machines, it is a testimony to the deeper truth that preparation and strength overcome fear and despair. In the war-torn skies of the Pacific, Japanese pilots placed their hope in tradition, in old tactics, in the belief that courage alone would carry them through. Yet courage without preparation falters, and tradition without adaptation breaks beneath the weight of reality. The Hellcat was the manifestation of preparation, of lessons learned, of discipline applied, and of strength brought forth in the right season. Fear has a way of ruling men. It whispers in the heart, convincing warriors that they are already defeated before the battle begins. For the Japanese pilots, fear of the Hellcat became a chain that bound them, making their hands tremble and their decisions falter. Yet for the Americans, preparation turned fear into fuel. Every training session, every hour of discipline, every improvement in design was a brick laid in a fortress of confidence. When their pilots took to the skies, they did not fight with dread but with assurance, knowing they carried the stronger weapon, the better training, and the firm support of their comrades. In this we see the parallel for our own battles in life. Fear comes to every heart, whether on the battlefield or in the quiet struggles of the soul. Yet fear is overcome not by blind courage, but by strength gained through preparation. The Hellcat pilots were not simply brave men. They were men who had been armed, trained, and equipped to meet their enemy. Their courage was not reckless. It was rooted in the confidence that comes from readiness. Preparation itself is a kind of faith in action. It is the belief that tomorrow's battle will come, and that today's effort will not be wasted. The engineers who built the Hellcat believed in victory enough to labor over its design. The instructors who drilled pilots believed enough to demand discipline. And the men who flew the Hellcat believed enough to trust their training, their machine, and their mission. It was this combination that transformed fear into victory. For the Japanese, who lacked such preparation, fear grew unchecked. Their aircraft were inferior, their training stretched thin, their replacements rushed into battle without experience. They clung to courage alone, but courage without substance became desperation. Their fear was a reminder that strength must be cultivated long before the trial begins. So the Hellcat becomes not only a symbol of military triumph, but of spiritual truth. Fear is defeated by readiness, by the quiet strength built in days of training, by the steady work of preparation before the storm breaks. Just as the Hellcat entered the skies ready to face any challenge, so too must we prepare our hearts, our minds, and our spirits to face the battles of life. When fear rises, when challenges loom, it is strength built in advance that allows us to endure, to strike forward and to emerge victorious. The Hellcat's arrival did not merely alter the course of battles, it reshaped the entire Pacific War. Its dominance in the skies over the Marianas was not an isolated victory, but a turning point that cascaded through the months and years that followed. Where once the Japanese Air Force had dictated the tempo of conflict, now it was crippled, its wings clipped by the overwhelming superiority of the American fighter. The Hellcat became not only a weapon, but a force of destiny, tilting the balance of power irreversibly toward the Allies. The Battle of the Philippine Sea stands as the most visible testament to this shift. Dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, it was a slaughter on an unprecedented scale. Japanese pilots, poorly trained and flying outdated aircraft, were hurled against waves of Hellcats, and the result was devastation. Hundreds of Japanese planes were destroyed in a single day, while American losses were minimal. This battle shattered Japan's ability to contest the skies, stripping away the protective shield that once covered its fleets and islands. From that moment forward, the seas became pathways for American power, and the islands fell one by one under relentless assault. The Hellcat's impact was not only in numbers destroyed, but in morale broken. Japanese pilots no longer entered combat believing they could prevail. Their defeats accumulated, and with each one, the myth of the Zero crumbled further. For the Americans, the opposite was true. Pilots returned from missions with stories of overwhelming victories, with kill tallies that grew into legends, and with the assurance that they were flying the most dominant aircraft in the theater. Confidence swelled, and confidence itself became a weapon as powerful as any gun. The Hellcat also ensured that America's strategy of island hopping could succeed. Without air superiority, amphibious landings would have been slaughterhouses. But with the Hellcat clearing the skies, Marines and soldiers could advance under the shield of dominance, knowing that the skies belonged to them. At Saipan, Guam, and Tinian, the Hellcat flew above as guardian and avenger, ensuring that Japanese resistance was weakened before boots even touched the sand. Strategically, the Hellcat also hastened Japan's decline in production. Every aircraft destroyed meant not just a lost pilot, but a drain on already strained resources. Japan could not replace its aircraft or its experienced aviators at the pace required. America, however, with its vast industrial might, churned out Hellcats by the thousands, ensuring that losses could be replaced with ease. It was a contest of attrition that Japan was doomed to lose, and the Hellcat was the blade that cut deepest into its dwindling strength. But beyond battles and strategy, the Hellcat's lasting impact lay in the way it embodied the turning tide of the war. It was proof that America had not only recovered from the blows of 1941, but had risen stronger, more determined, and more capable than ever. It was a symbol to the Allies that victory was within reach, and a warning to the Axis that their dominance was crumbling. The roar of the Hellcat's engine became the sound of a new order taking shape in the Pacific. An order where the skies no longer belonged to Japan, but to the rising power of American strength. The Hellcat's legacy endures not simply as a machine, but as a moment when the course of history bent sharply toward victory. Its wings carried not just pilots, but the hopes of nations, and in its shadow, the Pacific War moved inexorably toward its end. And so, brothers and sisters, as we look back to those burning skies over the Marianas, we remember not just machines of war, but the courage, the fear, the preparation, and the faith that shaped the outcome of history. The Hellcat was more than steel and fire. It was a lesson in endurance, a reminder that strength built in silence will one day roar across the heavens. Just as the pilots rose above fear with discipline and determination, so too must we rise above the battles in our own lives, armed with faith, wisdom, and perseverance. If you found strength in this story, if you value the lessons of history told through the smoke and thunder of World War II, then I ask you to stand with this journey, like this message, share it with others, and subscribe so that together we can keep the voices of the past alive for the future.